Ladies and gentlemen, it is December the 17th, 2021, and we're about to begin another episode of Philos-o-clock with EcceFatum. I will phone this gentleman using Discord, and we will discuss capitalism and critiques of it, which is a spicy topic indeed.
Hello there.
Hello. Oh, I have push to talk on. Crap. Hello. I had push to talk on, but I fixed it.
Awesome. I was thinking my headphones don't work.
Nope, that was a Neuro problem. Your headphones are good.
Is the microphone sounding all right?
Sounds good to me. Chat house's volume level relative to me. Good, bad, disastrous, fantastic. So, to kind of, chat says good. To kind of kick us off, one thing that we did as preparation for this topic, because it's a spicier one. There's a duh command, as in like duh, like that's obvious. And the command reads, read it here for you. Criticism of capitalism is not an endorsement of communism. So, capitalism is a system. Many people would say that it's not a perfect system and it's not God and it's not something that we need to worship, but many people think highly of it. So whenever someone has a critique about capitalism, they say, you're a communist in disguise and I just discovered it. However, this is not the case. Any idea that is put forth should be tested in the marketplace of ideas by people critiquing it, making sure it holds up, and then also noticing what the weaknesses of it are. So welcome. EcceFatum is going to help us figure out some good and bad of capitalism. And you're going to shout out something with the World Economic Forum. Did you want to do that at the start or at the end?
I think I'll do that at the end.
Cool.
And yeah, you said that really nicely, that we need to explore the ideas we're living by in this case and see whether or not they hold up. And capitalism in itself is a term that is well defined, but we use it in many different ways. And whenever a critique comes up, it might look as communist, socialist, Marxist, and it's not really useful to look at it this way, because we need to look at the merits of what we're doing out of capitalism, how it works, and then see what we want to adjust based on that. And not just, all right, there's something that isn't working, we're going to throw the whole thing overboard and do something else, because that's not very useful. And I'm happy to offer a critique of communism as well, but I don't think it's as relevant to me, to most of your viewership and yourself as well. But for the sake of balance, if people want that, I'd be happy to do that too.
Well, we did talk about Marx before, and one of the things that we pointed out was that the system that he laid out, which was very robust in how much just raw writing he did about everything about it, was that communism wasn't really implemented in the way that he envisioned it to. Basically, he guessed his target audience wrong. He thought that he was going to be the coolest game in town for some already developed smaller countries, but the Soviet Union and China and stuff ended up taking up the name communism and having a system that has some of those elements, but it wasn't exactly true to form.
Yeah. I think the reason for this is that an established economy, an established system is pretty difficult to overthrow unless people are super unhappy. So it's easier to make a new system in a country where people are suffering through not having enough food, or just basically things being terrible enough for them to rise up and wanting something new. And the whole reason I think it's important to critique capitalism and to change something about capitalism in the long run is that we will not make, we don't give rise to such problems where people want to overthrow the current system. Because overthrowing a system will come with a lot more suffering. And to be frank, we don't have a good solution on where to go next.
Right. You would need a similarly effective, like, competitive model for capitalism for us to just switch into something else. We don't really have something we can just easily switch into and then say, yeah, this was better all along. The way that I see it, and this is a really oversimplified look at it, is that capitalism allows people, governments, large groups of people to generate more stuff than the alternatives. So if you're just looking at raw production, capitalism is better because it basically allows the companies to cut corners with how much they pay people so they can churn out more stuff. And the free market basically allows for people to push really hard to improve their station. So you're not really in a fixed spot that you might be with some kind of communist system or alternative system where everyone gets a more or less equal share of the pie. If you just take pure crazy capitalism, it would be everyone earns whatever they can. And if you don't earn very much, then you don't get very much. If you work really hard, then you get a whole bunch. And a lot of people like that format. In the US, we have a lot more of a friendly perspective toward capitalism than I think other places. And things like communism and socialism are even seen as dirty words by some people. Oh, he's a socialist. Ooh, spooky. But you're in Switzerland, and socialism is pretty woven into how most governments and governance works, so it wouldn't really shock people to hear that a certain candidate is socialist.
Yeah, the term socialism isn't thrown around as much here. I think it's seen as more natural to have socialist policies within our system of government in order to get a stable society. So that they're not opposed to each other as they are sometimes portrayed to be in the US. I have one little nitpick on what you just said, being hardworking and making a lot of money while not working hard, not making much. This is true in theory, but in practice, you could do very little and get a lot of money, or you could work really hard and not get much. So the theory is good. How we implemented it is a bit lackluster.
Yeah.
And the question there would be how much we value different types of work.
True. And there are a lot of just barriers and things that end up happening in society that make the game not fair. So we don't live in a purely capitalist country in the US. It has capitalist elements. It has some socialist elements. And we're kind of gradually striving for better treatment of people and better fairness over time. One of the things that we've already had happen is the amount of working hours for people has been going down as our technology has improved. Because we can work more efficiently, we don't need to work as much in terms of total, like, lifting time, waking hours, etc. And with COVID, that's been pushed even more into question of how much do people actually need to be physically in the office doing work, or can they work from home, kind of a thing. I think in the Industrial Revolution, there was really crappy working conditions. People had to work super hard for very little money. It was still better than previous times, just because you had more production and stuff being generated, a bunch of jobs being created and that kind of a thing. But the conditions were really poor. People were expected to work very long hours for very low pay, but it was a job, and it was better than farming for some people. So it's an interesting progression. It kind of makes you wonder what the next big wave is of work and how it changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going a good direction. And since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've seen a lot of adjustments in working conditions, mostly for the better. What kind of happened was to just outsource the poor working conditions into other countries. And this is still very much ongoing. But I want to kind of give this whole talk a bit of structure first before we go into that. So in order to kind of be able to go point by point and to give a bit of an overarching view of the relevant, in my opinion, relevant critiques of capitalism, we're going to go from top down. So basically we'll be looking at government structures, then we're looking at corporations, and then we'll be looking at the impact on the individual.
Cool. Big to small.
And yeah, so I did have CF Whiskey set up the beautiful da command, which I'm quite proud of.
Some top stuff there.
Yeah, I want people to be able to address their opinions in chat and to have also this bit of back and forth with chat as far as I'm able to kind of keep up with the relevant points that are being said. But I will not have time, and I'm not in the mood to address this whole issue of this is just socialist, Marxist stuff.
Was it Sea of Whiskey's idea or your idea, out of curiosity?
That was my idea.
Nice. Preempting the Twitch chat rage. It's not his first rodeo, chat. He's been on this show before.
All right. So since we're taking a top-down approach, the first thing we could critique in capitalism is trickle-down economics, because it's supposedly top-down. So who in chat thinks that trickle-down economics work? Please, a show of hand, please.
Press 2 or raise your hand. You just got as rich as Bezos and Musk? Oh my gosh, just now? Congratulations, that's crazy. They were just out there billionairing. Taurus is responding in-game. Valid.
So chat seems to agree that trickle-down economics doesn't work, which is not 100% true. It's just super ineffective. So we might as well say, no, it doesn't work.
Why doesn't it work?
Because there's little incentive to spend money when you already have a lot and you want to accumulate wealth because some reason. So it's proven to be much more effective to give money to the middle and lower class. This will enrich the economy much more than it does to give a bunch more money to those who already have a lot. I found this really nice comment by Pope Francis, and I think when the Pope has to weigh in on economic theories, it says something. And he said in 2013, some people continue to defend trickle-down theory, which assumes that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world. This opinion, which has never been confirmed to be the fact, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power and the sacralizing workings of the prevailing economic system.
He's a bit more of an active pope, I feel like, in just how many statements he makes. And he's more of a progressive pope than some other ones they've had.
This was Benedict the 16th, so it's not the acting pope anymore.
Oh, it's not? I messed up the popes.
I think, at least.
You said Pope Francis?
Yeah. Francis the 16th.
16 Francises?
Oh no, that's sorry. The first? I'm not sure. Basically the one that came before the Pope we have now.
Benedict.
That would be the 16th. That is what got me confused.
Popes have not been historically original with their names. True. This is just a critique of Pope names now.
Well, that's another fair topic to critique, I guess. All right.
But it kind of goes to show you that there have been people who were not sold on the trickle-down economics of the Reagan era right away. And the effects of it, I feel like, would be pretty difficult to disprove. You could just say, well, it hasn't worked for you, but it's good. And it's more so just an assertion that this is the best system rather than testing them. And that's the really tricky thing, is the format of the world is constantly changing. The types of jobs that exist are constantly changing. So the best economic system and government for people would also be one that is a moving target.
One thing I want to quickly address, the deadline on the project that is under the Philos-o-clock command has been moved to end of December. I apparently didn't edit it on all the deadlines in the webpage. So you have time till the end of the month to participate in the project. Where were we? Capitalism. So we're having this idea of capitalism, as you said, of the successful accumulating a lot, the unsuccessful not getting much out of it, which seems fair. The question there would be what constitutes success. And this is the second point I wanted to bring up. Is capitalism regulated enough? So basically, are we rewarding the right kind of behavior? And one of the big critiques of capitalism or anything other than capitalism is you'd get a government that's too big, you get overregulation, people will not be able to work for a living because they can't do stuff anymore. And this is true to some degree. I think too big of a government, too much regulation is definitely not helpful. But there's some areas that need to be regulated because there's no inherent incentive for the economy to regulate itself. A good example for this would be exploitation of the environment. Like, if there's money to be made by destroying the environment and there's no one stopping you, why wouldn't you do it?
Right, the negative consequences would happen so much later relative to the individual who's making the profit off of it. There wouldn't really be a reason other than a moral or existential one.
Yeah, I think we're kind of looking at this becoming an existential threat, so there might be inherent incentives not to do it, but this has not been the case, and the knowledge of destroying the planet could be something that's not worth doing hasn't been around for this long, or not. It hasn't been common for this long, which is a bit unfortunate. So, yeah, you don't want a government to be over-regulating, but you want a government to regulate certain things.
Regulate those other businesses. Don't mess with my business, okay?
Exactly.
They actually do that. It's kind of a joke, but it's not. Where if you have a lot of power, you can talk to politicians and you can negotiate with them and say, hey, we do this stuff for you guys. Look at all these jobs we make. What if you gave us some tax breaks or whatever? And that kind of exchange happens all the heckin' time, which ends up favoring the people who can afford to have those people go talk to politicians and try to sway them. It doesn't really help your small business, local business, middle class. That's the thing that the upper class can really do, or the mega corporations, but your standard mom and pop restaurant on the corner, they're not going to be able to sway their governor or their senators to do different stuff. Unless the senator eats at their restaurant and they're like close friends or something, but that's overly specific.
Yeah. If history has taught us anything, it's that it's good to be individually wealthy. And there's nothing inherently bad about this, in my opinion. It gets problematic when we go to the extremes, but it's nice to have some economic power. It's nice to have some political power that you basically, in order by having money, you have time, so you can do things other than just grinding out enough money to bring food to the table. The Greeks already knew this, that it's nice to have some money and don't be a slave.
True.
So when we're looking at capitalism, it's the capital incentives that makes the world go round, or flat for some people, I guess. And this is a system that is inherently rewarding. You do things in order to make a profit, in order to hopefully invest that money again to make more. Like it grows out of itself, which is good for humanity for the most part, unless like we're destroying the planet on the way there, or we're exploiting workers. Like there's many things not to like about it, but the underlying system is rather simple and rather good, in my opinion. It gets problematic though in some areas, and this is, in my opinion, and there's people that share this opinion, there's other people that would go much against this. I don't think every part of the economy should be for profit. There's some areas that are inherently bad if they're for profit. A good example here would be a prison system. If you run prisons for profit, making money off taxpayers, and basically making more money the more people are incarcerated, you get an issue.
Well, it incentivizes you to keep people in jail rather than to rehabilitate them because they're cheap labor for you if they're in jail.
Exactly. Another example that could be used here is healthcare system, where it's nice for the healthcare system to make some amount of money, but if they can basically self-regulate on setting prices, things will get rather expensive.
Yeah, for profit,
sorry?
it's an interesting call whenever, say, you figure out some kind of new medicine that's going to cure something for people. What price do you charge for that medicine? You could charge a super high price if you're the only person who's figured out how to do it. And there have been some researchers who became more or less infamous because they created that medicine and it just was a super high price and had to break the bank for anyone to get it, when the production cost of that could be really low. So how much profit should you as a business person really shoot for in certain departments? Is there a reason why you might go for a bit less profit and have it be more purchasable for your consumer?
Yeah, I totally agree. So as with many things, it's not completely bad to do it for profit, but it's definitely not only good to do it for profit. In terms of medicine, you could look at like two different sides. One is the initial cost you put into developing it, and the other is the production of the medicine once you know how to do it. And it makes sense to kind of put them together in order when you set a price to the medicine. But you could also completely decouple them, have public funding for the research, and then just give out the medicine at a slightly higher price than production in order to pay the production of it. So it's not necessarily that they need to be tied, but I guess it makes sense that they are, given the structures that we have for companies that develop these drugs.
Yeah, it ends up being a pretty big cost. People mention insulin in the chat. You could be dealt some health issue that's just super expensive over time. And if we're talking about life and the pursuit of fairness, it's a pretty shit deal if you get some health condition that requires you to purchase regular medicine that other people don't have to purchase. And then on top of that, it's like a super high price for it, even if the production cost is fairly low, because those people are looking to make a profit. So they're making a profit based on a bad deal of cards that some people got. So that feels predatory. It is cool, and I guess the upside and exciting part of capitalism is it incentivizes innovation in a pretty cool way, because you have a chance to really make it big if you create some new thing that people really need, and then it just takes off. So the upward mobility potential is pretty high. The exploiting people is also potentially high, depending on the category and what people would deem to be acceptable prices for what they get rendered.
Yeah. Someone mentions oxycodone, and we'll be talking about setting bad incentives when we talk about the corporation side of things. So it's a very good critique, but it's not part of the government side of things, in my opinion. It might as well be government regulated, but a lot of people would see that as an over-regulation of the side of the government, telling companies what drugs are they able to produce and how to market them. Gets problematic. The insulin cost, for example, is very high in the US. I think a lot of people nowadays go to either Canada or Mexico to get their insulin, because there it's still a lot cheaper because they have regulations on drug prices, which makes a lot of sense in my opinion.
Yeah, the downside for that, I did watch a documentary on people who go over the border to Mexico to get their medicine, is some of it is a knockoff. It's not actually legitimate. Maybe it produces a similar effect or feeling for the person who takes it, but if it's inherently a different thing, sometimes it can cause more harm than good. But yeah, that is pretty crazy that they charge so much that people are willing to go to another country to get it for cheaper. And it does show you that it can be produced for a lot cheaper as well.
Not sure. Are you hearing an echo?
No.
All right.
I could turn him down slightly. It's usually a volume thing. Okay. That may help it.
This is the one comment we get when you put on Philos-o-clocks on YouTube. It's, his microphone sounds stupid.
It's not the smartest microphone. They gave his microphone an IQ test. It didn't do well.
The next point on the government side of things is basically government deciding on monetary policy. We kind of already went into this when we talked about the trickle-down effect or the lack thereof, but there's many other policies and regulations a government could go for, and economists very much disagree on what is most effective and what should be done in a given situation. Inflation?
Inflation?
Inflation, yeah. Inflation being one thing. So when you increase the money supply, the money that already is out there will lose value. And this is something that's happening over time somewhat naturally, that money will lose value over time. That's why when we're looking at this computer was worth $2,000 in 1980, and adjusted for inflation, that'd be $4,000 now, but it's a 1980s computer, so it's basically worthless. So inflation is somewhat natural, and it really gets to be a problem when there's too much inflation, being called hyperinflation, where money devalues to a point where you can't afford things anymore. This happened in Zimbabwe, for example, where they had to print a $1 trillion banknote, which is kind of awesome, also kind of sad.
The other dollars just had no effect. Took $1 trillion to get a banana. But it was taped to a wall. And that's a fancy place for a banana.
I've never been to Zimbabwe, so I never held one of those $1 trillion notes. Would be nice to have one though, just for the... it's really easy to be a billionaire these days. Just get some Zimbabwe dollar, you're good. I've been to Indonesia, and they had a similar problem, not as extreme, but basically their lowest banknote is 1,000 or 2,000, which is a couple of cents basically. So what happens is they have like 10 of them or even 20 of them tuckered together, and it's like one big banknote, which is kind of funny.
You need 40,000 Venezuelan to buy a burger. Oh my gosh. Is it a really good burger? Or is that like a decent burger?
Well, this in and of itself doesn't say much, because you would need to look at how much money do people make.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just a number. It's like saying it's $1 trillion Zimbabwe dollar to buy a burger. But if people are make 10 trillion a day, it becomes relative to what people are making. But yeah, you want to have a strong government in order to implement good monetary policy, good in quotes there, because people don't agree on it. But basically, you want a currency to keep its value, because otherwise you just you take people's livelihoods away if you devalue their money. There's been interesting uses of inflation. It's what led, to some degree, led to the Second World War. Germany after World War I had to pay a lot of reparations, like a lot of money. And they thought, well, if we're owing them 10 billion mark, we just devalue the currency to where 10 billion marks is just like a sandwich. We pay it off easily and then we're good to go again.
That's funny.
It's a smart idea, but the unstable society it produced is what led to the rise of the Nazi Party. So yeah, I'd advise countries not to do that.
Yeah, the consequences of driving the value of your currency into the ground end up being paid by the citizens, and they're not very happy about that.
Yeah. Another economic policy that's interesting to look at is austerity measures. It's basically when your country is in debt, you implement austerity in order to have less government spending to balance the budget. And this is also not inherently bad, as well as not inherently good. It kind of depends on where you cut spending. What is it that you don't want to spend money on anymore? In my opinion, military budget is something I'd cut, because what's the point in having the biggest, strongest military if your people are not able to buy a lot of other shit? So there's no community to defend if you don't have a community anymore. So you could cut spending there. But there's incentives to spend for military, so you rather cut spending for social programs and educations and stuff that actually benefit people.
You're saying there should be bread on the table before people get guns.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I think we talked about this when we talked about Confucius. It wasn't him, it was one of his students that laid out this question. What's most important for your people to have? Enough food, enough weapons, or enough trust in the government? So if you could only have one of these three, which would it be?
Food.
So he goes through all three arguments and basically saying, food, super important. Your people will be unhappy if they don't have food. They'll be unable to defend themselves if they don't have weapons. But the point it came down to is it's most important to have trust in your government. Because if there's no food, but you can trust your government that there will be food again in the near future, you'd keep a stable society. Like, people will be unhappy, but they have the trust in order not to overthrow the whole thing. And it's likely that there will be food again if people will stick together and have the trust and keep working towards producing more food, for example.
That would be on a timer, though. I was thinking just generally, if you don't have food, then you die. But
yeah, it's definitely on a timer. But as soon as you kind of lose this trust in government, a lot of things will happen that will not necessarily replace the food and will make life more miserable for a lot of people.
Kastnitz agrees the U.S. military is bloated, the budget is bloated, but we have the Navy patrolling the oceans and trade after the collapse of the British Empire. Yeah, that's something that we talked about in the episode on Leviathan. The Leviathan is like a super huge entity that keeps other entities in check, basically. And at the end of World War II, the United States ended up being the Leviathan because of its massive production. They were able to just crank out so many trucks, ships, planes, all kinds of stuff because they're in the Western Hemisphere and they don't have to defend themselves against land attacks aside from Mexico and Canada. So relatively light base defense required, got to ramp up super huge production. And then you could say that there is value in having a Leviathan actor on the world stage to make sure that other countries don't misbehave. As we've seen, the US can misbehave, and then other times other countries will get away with stuff, and the US doesn't act on that. So it's definitely a hot mess of a situation, but there are some upsides to having a strong military for sure.
Yeah, there's good reason to have a strong military. And as you said, it gets a bit problematic when there's one entity that controls the rest and kind of implements its own rules, which will likely be for their benefit. So it's good to have a world police. It'd be nicer if the world police would actually be a world police, not a American police. But I would totally agree. You need to have someone to keep things in check, because any policy you make or anything, there needs to be this element of enforcement. Otherwise, people will not stick to it. Sadly.
Yep.
Which brings us to the next point, this being disincentives over incentives. So what's happening now is we're setting, or governments set disincentives for wrong behavior. So you're polluting the waters, you get a fine. You're exploiting workers, you get a fine. You're crushing unions, you probably get away with it, that's not an issue. And this is not US specific, but it seems to be a bit more dominant in the US, where there's little incentive to do good, but a lot of disincentives to do bad. This isn't inherently wrong either, but it kind of gives you the mentality of, I might get away with it. Let's just try and see.
Let's try what?
Sorry, my wife just stepped in. Let's try to get away with it. Let's do a little bit of pollution over there. No one will notice. And we're kind of pushing the boundaries to the point where, as long as we don't get caught, we might as well keep doing it. So I'd be all for having more incentives towards doing the quote-unquote right thing. And this is something we see in monetary policy as it relates to energy sources, where we're putting incentives on clean energy. So basically the government is giving out money for cleaner sources of energy and tax the more pollutant sources of energy more. So this kind of balance there is what's important.
Yeah, it's certainly cheaper for people to just dump their garbage into the ocean, and it's pretty difficult to catch someone who does that if you just like throw equipment and things in there. That's one of the issues that we have, is to properly dispose of things in an environmentally unconscious way. That would take a whole bunch of effort, and it would cut into your profits because you have to pay people to know how to do all that stuff correctly. Or you could just throw it into the sea And save yourself some short-term money. Long-term, it's going to be a huge pile of garbage out there. Whoops.
Yeah, the incentive in capitalism is always to accumulate more wealth or more capital. So if you find a cheap way to get rid of the stuff that you would otherwise have to get rid of very expensively, might as well try.
Mm-hmm.
So there's very little ethical regard when it comes to how we're trying to make money, which is probably, it kind of goes into all the criticisms we could bring to the table when it comes to capitalism, that it's serving its own purpose and it's not necessarily serving the good of the people.
Mm-hmm. But when you say the people, which people? It's a tricky question.
My people.
Your people? The Swiss, then.
Basically, everyone I consider to be part of the in-group, and yeah, the rest is not important.
It's a rather convenient position for you to be in.
Now, it gets tricky really fast. But this is why we need to have these discussions and look at specific policies, look at the way things are run these days, and be like, all right, is this really how we want to do it? And there's been this question asked by Mollerax at the beginning, whether or not capitalism and democracy go well together. And I'd very much say they do. There's a lot of potential issues, which we'll go in next. But capitalism by itself needs to be kept in check. And democracy as a tool is nice because you can kind of find the consensus within people on, do we really want to pollute the ocean? Do we really want to just exploit all the natural resources? And make policy based on the common understanding of people on what we want or do not want happening. How to implement a democracy keeping capitalism in check would be a completely different topic. In Switzerland, we have to, in some regions at least, vote once every 3 months. And we're voting on a wide array of issues. And there's the possibility to have an initiative. Basically, we're collecting a bunch of signatures saying this is what we want happening. For example, we don't want companies to pollute anymore. So we want much bigger penalties, for example, on companies polluting. So we're creating a larger disincentives to do it.
You find
and
them.
Then you find them. And then you'd have a popular vote on this, and depending on the result, government would be forced to implement a new ruling and change the law accordingly. And this is a good example of how democracy and capitalism can go well together. There's other ways of doing it. This is just the one that seems most common to me. And I'd say it's not a bad system. Not without its issues, though, because you can also... the question that I think it was Plato raised was, what happens when the 51% of wolves decide over the 49% of sheep what's for dinner?
The sheep or the dinner.
Yeah. So, democratic process, not without its flaws. And yeah, this is where we get to the next point, where we have wealth being power to some degree. And if you have a lot of economic power, means also you have a lot of political power, because you can buy votes or you can influence politicians. You can basically give money to political parties, and they will not necessarily do your bidding, but since they're incentivized to be on your nice side because they want to get more money in the future, they will not likely do something that will hurt you. This is definitely problematic, where we have this concentration of wealth. And this concentration of wealth also means a concentration of power. And then you have companies or individual being able to have a overproportionate influence on politics.
Yeah. Politics being a bot game doesn't really sound too good to middle and lower class. Upper class, that's the best.
Yeah, so these are the points I have in terms of the government side of things, but I'm happy if chat has something else in mind that would kind of relate to the government side, because I'm sure I haven't covered all the bases yet. There's a lot of critique to be made on capitalism, but not all is bad. So I'll give chat some time to come up with other critiques, and we can kind of start go into what's happening on the corporation side of things. Corporation itself is a interesting structure. It's somewhat originated with the Dutch East India Company. This is during the colonial times. The Dutch East India Company was one of those companies that owned a lot of boats, bringing stuff from the from India back to Europe and selling it there. So it was basically it used to be just individual people paying for individual ships going over there, bringing stuff back. And there's some inherent risk there. There's piracy, there's storms, there's a lot of things that could happen on the way. Mutiny on the ship, like, it wasn't a safe investment per se. So what the Dutch East India Company did was saying, all right, we'll put together a lot of resources, and rather than having one ship, we send 100 ships. And instead of charging for it individually, we'll charge a amount of each ship to each person. So if 80 ships make it back, you'll have a 80% return on investment and like that. So basically, we're splitting risk in order to make investment more safe. And there's nothing bad about it. It makes a lot of sense. And this was then developed over time into the kind of corporate structures we have nowadays, where a lot of people own a little share or even a big share of a company, giving them the liquidity, the financial means to invest into things, making their company bigger, in the hopes of getting a return on investment, being the company making profit and then sharing that profit to some degree, or the increase of the value on the stock market.
It sounds like a Zerg approach where you just, well, this is a risky investment. We'll just send 100 ships. Most of them will make it back. Just cancel out the risk. Okay. Throw Zerglings at the problem until it's solved.
Exactly. But as good as this approach is, it doesn't really look at the fate of the individual Zergling.
It's all for the swarm. Yeah, if you're that Ling that ends up being dealt the storm or the disease or whatever, it's not the best story for you.
I was thinking of the group of Link that gets annihilated by a Widow Mine.
Oh man, that would be very tragic.
Which is like, I'm just walking here. Yeah, so there's a problem for the individual with this structure. And there's the stock market in and of itself is what came out of this structure. Basically, we started to have a much bigger abstraction to the company than there used to be during the Dutch East India Company, where there was, all right, we own parts of these hundreds of ships. Now it's so abstract that you can go online, you buy stock of a company you've never heard of, hoping the stock price will increase, or, which is even weirder to me, you can buy options on the stock price of a company decreasing, and you make money if they lose value, which is something I couldn't explain even if I wanted to. And again, this isn't inherently bad. You want companies to have money in order to invest into things to, as you said, we're producing a lot of goods, and a lot of these goods are actually good, not just goods, which is a
good goods.
Good goods, exactly. A good distinction to be made between goods and good goods. Yeah, so you don't want to stop this, but there's the question of how much fluctuation do you should there be able to happen within the stock market? Because, for example, you could have a small company and it's traded openly on the market, and someone decides to buy a lot of this stock because they think this is an awesome business. They sell DVDs, which will what's the term? Skyrocket. So this is something for the future. So we buy a lot of it. The stock price will therefore increase, and then once you reach a certain threshold, you just dump it all, and the likelihood of the price falling below the point it was before, so you're basically decreasing the value of the company without anything external happening to it other than you just speculating on the price, you're likely to ruin the livelihood of a lot of people working for them, because there's no reason for the fluctuation in price other than speculation. But a company could go bankrupt based on it, and this is problematic. What's happening in game? Doesn't look good. Your town looks kind of messed up, or is that the opponent's town?
So I tried trickle-down economics, but it didn't work. And then I tried making knights, but there were archers and battering rams that are now destroying my stuff. Overall, I focused a lot on food for my people, and that's part of what the conversation was about, right? So I don't feel bad about what happened, because before my villagers died, they had delicious bread, fresh bread from these farms. We may not have survived the war, but we had a decent economy.
Nice. So your people are not destroyed, but at least they were well fed
Yes.
until it happened. That's nice.
It could have been worse.
Yeah, so we already talked about good goods and arguably not so good goods. And this is an issue in capitalism nowadays, in my opinion, where we're not having the right incentives on producing good goods. There's been this story about light bulbs, basically back when there were 3 or 4 light bulb companies. They kind of came together and decided it's not really good business if our light bulbs last for too long. So we better put some imperfections in there so they have like an average lifespan of, I don't know what they decided on. I think it was like 3 or 4 years. And after that, you have to replace the light bulb because it breaks on average. And that's good business.
Dude, that happened maybe like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. They caught Apple pushing software updates to iPhones that were in perfect working order. It's a phone, it's a smartphone, you can connect to the internet, you can call people, it's got a screen, and the screen is fine, and the battery is fine. And they would make these software updates so heavy on the system that the older phones would just underperform. Where if you didn't update them, it would still work as a nice functional phone, but you just kind of make it shittier with your updates. So then people feel like, man, this iPhone is crap. I need to get the new one. It must have just worn out. Yeah, making stuff built to last means that you only get one sale. It's a little bit evil, but you can make stuff that's not built to last on purpose so that you can get them to buy the next one.
Yeah. Now,
Planned obsolescence, that's the word. Thank you.
Exactly. My question there would be, are we putting the right incentives? Like, if I want to get a new phone, I want to get a new phone because it's an awesome new phone. And I just got a new phone and a package my wife brought in because my phone is 7 years old now. So very on topic. Do we want to buy a new phone because it's a nice new tool to have, or do we want a new phone because the phone manufacturer made that our old phone would not be worth using anymore? And there's two completely different things.
There's another one that's coming to mind that was sort of a business scam where vacuum cleaners would require you to use a bag that was disposable. So you would have to continue to purchase these disposable bags when that as a concept is not required as part of the vacuum cleaner to do its job. It can take in the air and the gross stuff, and it can just be in a reusable container that you dump out, which is what a lot of modern vacuum cleaners used to do. But I think they were kind of notorious for requiring these to use bags, and they knew that you didn't need to do it that way, but they could at least get revenue over time if they did that.
Yeah. Have you seen BoJack Horseman?
I've seen some episodes of it, but not the whole thing.
He has a full vacuum cleaner at some point. So the best solution he comes up with is to go to the store and buy another vacuum cleaner to suck out the dirt from his previous vacuum cleaner. Awesome solution. But then he's like he does this once and realizes, all right, now the other one is full. So he goes to the store again, buys a third vacuum cleaner, and then realizes, well, this is not going to solve the issue. So he buys 4 more vacuum cleaners, and then he ends up having this circle of vacuum cleaners sucking each other empty. Just such a beautiful solution to the problem.
We need another vacuum cleaner, but who vacuums the vacuum cleaner? Well, we need another vacuum. I feel that though. It happens whenever I'll vacuum and it's great and all, but then there's something stuck in the brush and you have to clean that out, and then there's crap on the ground again, so you have to vacuum that up, but then you have to clean it out again. Yeah, cleaning is a hassle. The battle against entropy rages on.
Yeah. Now, the next issue with these not so good goods is marketing. And marketing is, depending on your point of view, can be super sinister. It can also be nice, because if you have a good product and you want people to know about your good product, there's no other way than to do marketing for it. So marketing in itself is not inherently bad, but the way we go about it gets to be a bit problematic, mainly because we're very far from actually marketing the product these days, but we're marketing the feeling behind it, the freedom you get from driving a car, or the happiness you get from a new mattress, or however you want to tie these things together. The women running after you by spraying yourself with Axe body spray. So we're not selling the product anymore, but we're decoupling the product from the feeling you want the product to invoke.
Oh my gosh. There was an advertisement that was so bad. We watched it and it was just a disaster. And they did basically the peak and extreme of that. It was a Coca-Cola ad, I think, or Pepsi or something, some soda beverage. And there's this crazy grand finals tournament. The gamers are in there. They've been training their whole lives for this. They're sweating and everything, and it's really tough. And then they're like all in this big, it looks kind of like a Warcraft battle scene sort of a deal. And they take a drink of this Coca-Cola beverage, and then they heckin' decide to lay down their arms and not fight each other in the competitive game. And it's like, what? If someone's going to a competition, they've invested all this time in training for this competition, and you've rendered them unable to physically compete with this beverage. Why would I purchase this beverage with what just happened here? It looks like a Blizzard cutscene, yeah. But it says nothing about what Coca-Cola is, what's in it. All of it is based on the assumption that you know what it is already, and you're going to have these good feelings if you have this soda beverage.
Yeah, we talked about this issue before when we talked about Epicurus, on whether or not happiness can be bought, or like if consumption could bring about happiness. And it's questionable, to say the least, but it can give you some joy, some temporary, like it's buying things, owning things is nice. I like stuff as well, so I don't want to go against that. But it's the way it's being sold to us is questionable. And there's this term, buyer's remorse, where you got really hyped up about a product and feel like, all right, this will change my life. I'll be so happy afterwards. And as soon as you click the buy now button, you're kind of like, this is actually shit. Why did I do it?
Buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
Was it Slavoj Zizek? He did a kind of a documentary movie / thing that was about desire, and how a lot of marketing and stuff is really trying to enhance that feeling of desire, which instantly goes away as soon as you achieve the experience of the product. So you desire the experience of having a Pepsi or a cola of some kind, and that sounds really good, and you might be really thirsty, and you're kind of driven by that desire for it. And then once you have one, It actually dehydrates you. It's not a great beverage to have if you're looking after your health and trying to improve your situation. It can have some maybe pleasant experiences if you like the taste and you like the carbonation, but it's not actually a good buy if you're looking for a plus expected value health investment.
Yeah, the value for money is questionable, which nicely brings us to another point on the corporate side being monopolization. So there's this nice Swiss company, I think some of you have heard of it, Nestle. They decided at some point that water is a rather nice good to own and to sell to people, because it cannot be that it's just readily available and people can get it for cheap. There's a lot more incentive to buy the source of it and then put it into plastic bottles and reselling it to people for a very much increased price than it would be if you just take it out of the ground, for example. Very good business.
It's my least favorite Swiss company.
Mine too.
Yeah, Nestle is one that gets a lot of flack in the Hydro Homies subreddit because they're all about water, and if you take water and you jack up the price and you add plastic, nothing about that transition was good, except maybe you can transport it better, but you can get, I recommend one of these, reusable glass containers. Glass is nice. You can have a lid on it. You could take the water going somewhere. It's heckin' good.
Have you seen the new Mad Max?
Yes.
Well, it's old already. They kind of open this big fountain and all the water rushes down.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching that thinking, well, maybe bottled water isn't as bad an idea.
Well, if you have containment problems, yeah, that is a container, so it's better than no container.
But most cases, it's a lot better to get non-bottled water.
Mm-hmm.
But there's good reason, as Muller points out, for bottled water in order to bring to places where they don't have natural water sources, or there's been a contamination happening. Like there's good reason for water to be bottled, but it shouldn't be the usual water.
Mm-hmm.
And this nicely brings us to another subject, which is also beverage related. And it's companies influencing politics, but in a bit more sinister way. So in this example, it'd be Nestle convincing the public that bottled water is safer than tap water. Not sure if they ever tried that, but the example that came to mind is Coca-Cola financed a study back in the 1970s or 80s, and they conclusively found that there is no linkage between sugar consumption and overweight.
Really?
Yeah, this happened.
There's no correlation.
No correlation. None whatsoever. It's all about your... basically, they claimed that it's all about how active you are. Or it's they blamed it on consumption of fat rather than sugar. So everything that just had nothing to do with that. Which they had to pay quite a big fine for the release of that study and for kind of faking stuff like that. Similar things are happening with the tobacco industry, which tobacco is still considered healthy in Indonesia because they never had those court cases, and the companies were never forced to back down from those claims. So if you want to be a healthy smoker, you just have to go to Indonesia. Just kind of nice, I guess.
Wow. It's a magical place. Because I thought it destroys your lungs and gives you like 18 kinds of cancer.
Yeah, so we have this influence that companies have because they have um, this financial power, this political power to some sense. And if they're not using it for the good and we're not forcing them to using it for the good, they will not likely do anything good with it. This isn't true for all the companies, and I think that's something I've been experiencing over my lifespan where we're building a lot of economic incentives for companies to do good, things like fair trade or like better treatment of the animals that we eat. Like there's a lot of good directions we're going, and there's also this side of things where the consumer wants this, so we're doing it for them because they have a better feeling of eating a product that has a ethical background, basically, which is nice. The problem there is we have there's a lovely XKCD on the topic where they have a bunch of different cereals, and one of the cereals is labeled asbestos free.
Wow.
And none of the others are. And you're kind of implying, all right, every other cereal has asbestos in it because they don't specifically state it's asbestos free. So we're kind of getting like the labels, they're not bad per se, but their definitions can be quite narrow. So what we're getting a good feeling about buying something that is fair trade. While fair trade doesn't necessarily mean that everyone gets a fair share. It's just a bit better than the things we usually do, which is to exploit them as much as we can.
Turn the exploitation back 2 notches. Okay, now it's fair trade. It's good for people to be conscious of stuff like that. And it's obviously not just an on or off of, is this business or line of work exploiting people? You're pretty much always using human resource to get stuff done. The question is, how exploitative is it? How fair is it to all the people involved in that kind of a chain? And if anyone has noticed, there's been a lot of talk about workplace culture and that kind of thing. So it's not just jobs in other countries that have issues. It's jobs in our country as well. Well, US and probably Switzerland. Basically any place with people is going to have some social and structural problems because the people in power want to keep power, and they don't always go about that in a righteous way.
Yeah. Any place with people will have people problems.
Indeed.
Yeah, so to kind of go back on the regulation side of things, there's little incentives for company to do good because doing good is, for the most part, more expensive than doing whatever you want to make more profit. So there needs to be bigger incentives for governments to put incentives on companies for them to do better, because it's not happening. There's no self-motivating factor in there other than us destroying the planet, but that might happen in like 10 or 15 years, maybe 100. It's like it's too far away. We might as well keep going, because let that be a problem of the next generation or the generation after that. So we're a bit short-sighted in that regard.
Yeah, it is tied to the duration of the human lifespan, though. So if it's not going to dramatically affect your generation why should you care? It's a very abstract and big picture thing to care about the future generations' well-being. I think a lot of people can bridge the gap to care about their children and their children's well-being and lives and stuff. But other people's children, you're maybe less emotionally compelled.
Why should I care about other people's children? What am I getting out of it?
Nothing, actually. Well, you can be remembered better, which is a thing. Are you listed as a hero or a villain in the history books? Some people would care about that, other people would not.
I think it's an interesting question on how the future will remember us. Not on an individual level, but rather the structures we have in place these days. And I think if we keep going in the direction of development and making things better, I'd say the time we're living in right now will be judged quite harshly. Because we're at a point right now where we have the means to not have people starve to death. We can solve a lot of medical issues, but we kind of decide not to because it's not profitable enough. So we're at a really interesting point in history where we can solve most problems, but we decide not to.
So you're saying that we're basically hitting a power spike, but we're being selfish and greedy about it, and not really distributing it in a way that everyone can kind of be picked up and caught up to speed. It would mean less square footage in the house of the wealthy. You don't get that extra swimming pool, you don't get a yacht. So there's a very tangible negative to the wealthy yielding some of their wealth. Doesn't sound too good to them.
Oh, this reminds me, I forgot one point when we talked about the monetary side of things, and this is inequality. Basically the class system we're in, for better or worse. And I don't think it's necessarily useful to think of people as being part of a class, but it's also not completely wrong. Like, there's some people that will never have to worry about money. There's a lot of people that will have a lot of enough money to do more or less what they want to do within a certain extent. And then there's a lot of people that will, almost no matter what they do, will never have these possibilities. So I think thinking of class in this sense is somewhat helpful, where you have some with no means, some with moderate means, and some with too much, or barely enough, depending on your viewpoint. And inequality itself is, I'm kind of hesitant to say natural. It's been around forever, as long as we know. And it's kind of what communism tried to fight by making everyone equal, which turned out not to work. So I'd say there is somewhat of a tendency towards towards a hierarchy. But
people start off with different hands, basically the education they got, the opportunities they have, and they also have different motivation scores, you could say. So it's pretty much impossible to have a perfectly even system, but you can strive for fairness.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between relative and absolute inequality, and I think this is really important. Like, imagine you have two people in your underneath your government, and one of them knows $1, the other owns $1 billion. So the absolute inequality would be 1 to a billion. Then you'd have to look at, all right, what does that mean? How much can the person with $1 afford with that $1 compared to how much the other person can afford? So basically, the most simple way to look at relative inequality is to look at, all right, those at the bottom of the hierarchy, how much are they still getting out of it? And if this gets too big, it gets really problematic for society, because when you're not able to afford food anymore, or not able to afford a house to live in anymore, there's a big likelihood of you not being okay with the system anymore. And compared to that, you could, like, it doesn't matter much how much money the richest people have, as long as everyone on the bottom of the pyramid can still make a good living. Like, you're still able to afford things. You're still, like, your livelihood is not at stake.
Right. So just because you want more income equality doesn't mean that you want to be rid of wealthy people in general. It's more being concerned with the bottom being too rough.
Yeah. Like, you'd have to kind of generate money in order to make that balance. So it's an easy solution to just get it from the top and then giving it to the bottom. The Robin Hood kind of economy. Politically very problematic. People do not like that because they feel like they will be on top at some point, which is questionable in my opinion.
That's the United States. We have millionaires and temporarily embarrassed soon-to-be millionaires.
Exactly. So it's nice to have something to believe in, something to be fighting for. Looking at the statistics of it, though, it seems so unlikely that you might as well want to get a nice slice of the cake on where you're currently at, rather than thinking, all right, I'll get all the cake as soon as I win this thing.
People don't want money. They're just actually about cake. Money is only means to get more cake.
Yeah. And then at some point we all found out that the cake was a lie in the first place.
Alas. Chat's mentioning progressive taxing. The tricky thing with that is it's basically kind of playing rich people musical chairs. You can do progressive taxing, and a lot of wealthy people will just physically move to a different location if you do that. So the end result ends up being kind of the same. I guess you would say you would still make more money. If you're a government, you put more regulations or you tax the rich more. Not all of them are going to leave, but some of the big fish will.
Yeah. It's also like there's different things you can tax. You can tax income, you can tax wealth. One thing that is seen very critical is the inheritance tax in the US, where it's basically you inherit a bunch of stuff and the government will take parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the saying over my dead body, which is what's happening. So you're not paying taxes. Everyone that will get the money from you after you're dead, bless you.
Thank you.
Will be taxed, and there's as I'm not even sure if there is such a tax in all the states in the US. And I think in most states where it is in place, there's like a minimum where you can like give each of your relatives 1 million each or 2 million each, and everything underneath that is not taxed. So it's basically it doesn't apply to most people, but for some reason people still are upset about it. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways on how a government could generate money through different means of taxation. And I think that the point of trying not to um, make more relative inequality is to do taxes in a way where it's not affecting the bottom of the pyramid.
Mm.
Have you ever heard of negative income tax?
No? They tax you if you
Uh,
lost money?
no. Also kind of interesting. It's like you lost a bunch of money. Pay some taxes on it.
Damn.
It's disincentivizing bad investment, which is an interesting thought, to be honest. No, negative income tax is kind of something somewhat similar to UBI, where if you're not earning enough money in order to make it to the lowest tax bracket, you will get money from the state to kind of compensate for you not making money. And then you have a linear or a progressive system above that. So it's basically an interesting means of wealth redistribution. And the opposite of trickle down. So you're giving more money to the poor and they will spend it, and it will result in more GDP growth than giving tax breaks to the rich.
Trickle-down economics has a fun name. What's the fun catchphrase name for this? Power-up economics?
There is a name for it. Let me see.
Trickle-down economics isn't a real school of economics. Not yet. It's still trickling down. Just wait a bit longer.
Trickle up, which is not as fancy word. The fountain effect, it's also called. Or it's like the fountain at the what's the hotel? I'm not sure I think it was the Belvedere in Las Vegas, where you have this big lake in front with all the sprinklers and um, like the jets. Ah, the Bellagio, yeah. Las Vegas is an interesting place to kind of see capitalism happening.
Capitalism in action. Uninhibited. Sin City. Throwing morals to the wind. How many bright lights can we put on this building? Las Vegas has no income tax? Well, a lot of states don't have an income tax. They probably still have a federal income tax. I'm in one of the 7 states that does not have a state income tax. Washington State, Florida, Texas, South Dakota, something else. Nevada maybe is one of them.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, especially in the US, are hesitant to pay taxes, to say the least. There's this nice saying of taxation being theft, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with.
Well,
Because it depends on your definition of stealing.
There are the two sides of it. There's the one where you get sort of a feeling of duty. You're doing a duty to your country if you pay your share of what you've earned because you got to benefit from things in that country. Like if you drove upon the roads and you made money at work, then you benefited from roads that you did not yourself directly pay for when you were maybe earning less money. So it feels kind of good. At the same time, some people have more of the attitude of cleverness. And our previous president was kind of more in that line where it's like if you're paying very little taxes but you're earning a lot of money, that makes you clever and cunning, and that's a good thing. But if everyone did that, then the government wouldn't have enough money to do its governing. So somebody's got to pay.
And as we talked about, there's arguments to be made of overregulation, but you want at least a little bit of regulation for things not to fall apart. And I'm not a fan of paying taxes either, but I do it, and I see the benefits I get out of it. Being infrastructure, being a healthcare system. Basically, it for me, it kind of boils down to the amount of trust you can have in your government that they will meaningfully spend the money you give them.
I think we mentioned that before, where it would be really cool if you could pay your taxes and then check boxes of what departments you want to contribute to.
Yeah, I would love that. I will be pushing for that in my area, just as a kind of spearheading experiment to see if there's anything worthwhile on a data collection site you could get out of it. Like not it being implemented in I choose to spend all my money on more snow machines. That this will directly happen then, but just to kind of gather on if you had a popular vote on what to spend money on, what will come out of it, and if you had a relative vote based on how much money you pay, what's the difference there? Like there's a lot of really interesting statistical data you could take out of that.
Mm-hmm. But how would they spend all their money in wars exactly? The overall attitude in the US for adventurism is much lower than it was 10 to 20 years ago. So I think people are more or less fed up with that kind of shenaniganry. Tomfoolery.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you have a big industries that produce war machines. So you want to spend at least a little bit each year so to keep them running, because otherwise you have a bunch of people that are out of their job and it's not like they could do anything else with their time. So it's a bit of an issue, I'd say.
Airplanes are cool. And we make some really heckin' awesome airplanes in the US. We'll contribute to the airplane fund.
Yeah, I think for like the US at some point deciding that they don't want a military anymore, which is not a likely decision, it would bring about huge structural changes, a lot of people, industries being out of the job, not just directly the arm industries, but all the suppliers and the suppliers of the suppliers. Like it'd be a quite a collapse of the economic system in the US. So if you wanted to do that, you would need to do it really slowly and have a lot of supporting structures in place for people if they're out of the job to get re-educated, find a different job. Like it would be possible. I don't think it's likely, but if you wanted to do it, if you just let the whole thing collapse, it will have a big effect on all the other parts of the economy as well. So that's probably not a good idea. All right. So with that, kind of to round the whole thing out, I want to look at some of the impact that capitalism has on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that comes to mind is, and this is, I'll bring the argument first. So basically, there's a claim that capitalism is similar to egoism. So by having this capitalist system in place, we're training people to just act as egoistic as possible. They will be incentivized to seek as much profit as possible. They will basically just look for their own good rather than for the collective good. I don't think this argument is correct. I think there's a lot of reasons to see how we're working together. We're working towards something a bit more abstract than just our own wealth. We're doing things that are not worth it in a monetary sense. I think the argument, you could turn it around a little and be, for those people that are egoistic, capitalism gives them all the freedom to do the stuff they probably shouldn't. But egoism is not inherently in the system. Like, people are not become more egoistic due to being in a capitalist system. The argument could be made that people would become more egoistic if we had communism, because there's more incentive to do so.
You're saying there's more incentive to be egoistic in a communist system than in a capitalist system?
I'd say so.
Can you define egoism real quick?
Egoism would be the pursuit of one's own goal. Like, this is not a general thing that you would pursue wealth or happiness or like any individual goal. It's just the person decides what they think is right and they will pursue that. Also, egoism in itself is not bad per se. It's like we all kind of want to pursue what makes us happy or what we think to be the right thing. And it gets problematic when we have the freedom to do the right thing, which is detrimental to the rest of people. So this is where you want to have disincentives, or you want to have regulations for people not to do that. So how are your people doing, by the way? Are they well fed?
Yeah, we're getting all kinds of fishing boats. Basically, we took a ridiculous level of command of the sea. Like, invested way too much in boats. I have such naval power that no one can even make another boat. The problem is, if they don't even go into the water, that's a bunch of my supply. That's like dead supply. So we'll see how this pans out. I don't know this game very well. I'm kind of just having fun milling about. But if anyone were to make ships, they would be toast to my awesome might.
So you're saying you took the monopoly of the sea to such a degree where you're not benefiting from it anymore?
Correct.
Because no one's interested in the product you're selling?
Correct. I just need a better marketing team. Guys, you're not capitalizing on the fish in the water. These fish are so good, and I'm just getting so far ahead right now. Anyone worth their salt in Age of Empires 4 would need to build a fleet to contest this fleet, right?
Yeah, you could start marketing overseas travel.
Hmm.
There's money to be made there. I'm just saying.
True. Yeah, we could make transport ships. I would say I'm not really the most aggressive player in this game. I am pretty happy to just power up and make stuff. It is pretty interesting that we get to take the time out of our day to give our own take and commentary on things such as broad as governments and systems thereof. Different world leaders and the plays that they made from the comfort of our armchair. We can think about it and talk about it.
Yeah, I think this was the point that the Greeks were making when they said, "Don't be a slave," where it's like you want to have enough economic means in order to have some time off, not to always be running after food or enough money to have a place to sleep at night. And out of this comfort, you can do so many things. And the whole notion of critique, I think, is somewhat the beauty of philosophy, where it's nice to come up with good solution, but basically the looking at something critically, be it capitalism in this example, or how religion ruled in Europe for a long time, like just being able to kind of look at things and shine different lights on them and see, is this worth it? Is this what we want to do? Is there another way to do this? It is where philosophy really shines. And it's not only outward looking, it can also be inward looking, where it's like, all right, do I really want to spend my time playing a video game? Is this what brings me happiness? And there's a lot of these questions don't have clear-cut answers. It's more individual. So we can decide, this is what I want to do. And we can decide, all right, this is not what I want to do anymore. But in order for that decision to happen, you need to raise the question first.
I will say it's a lot easier to critique things outside of your perspective that you would say you don't subscribe to. It's easier to see the negatives than seeing the negatives in whatever you're putting your stock in. Whatever I'm putting my stock in better be correct, otherwise I've been wasting my time. But those other ideas, they're so clearly wrong. Shh, don't even get me started.
I think that in order to be good at critiquing the outside, you'd also need to be good on critiquing the inside. Like if you can't look at yourself critically, it's difficult to have a meaningful outlook to the outside.
Yeah, well, at that point, if you're not able to articulate and critique the upsides and downsides of your own perspective, you're mostly just parroting whatever the media on your side is saying. And you just assume that everyone got to those conclusions from sound logic, and there aren't as many flaws on your side as the other side. So steady as she goes, Captain. I will continue believing in these things because I like being correct and right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to be said about confirmation bias. Or how we're attaching meaning to things that do not necessarily have meaning. That's a whole different kind of worms.
Yeah, so for capitalism, big picture wise, it's the dominating system in the world for just generating stuff and revenue. And rather than saying, okay, we need to throw this whole thing down, it's more so an assessment of, hey, maybe we can tune the system a little bit more to make it more kind and more fair to the individual. We can make these huge gains that are really nice to post in the quarterly report, but if the people are upset, then it's no bueno. It's worth wheeling it back a little bit. We get to see some of those mistakes. There was one that I talked about with Agent Smith where there was a journalistic team who put on this persona that they were actually some oil mogul who just had a ton of oil in some country. And they were talking to, maybe it was ExxonMobil or something, one of the big names in whatever it is, fossil fuels and so on. And this guy is like divulging all kinds of crap of like, oh, we knew that we've been polluting. We've known that for like 20, 30 years. But as long as we don't admit it, then it'll be fine. So he very quickly just divulged a whole bunch of stuff of the different corners that had been cut in their business model that to the public, they would never say that. But privately, they'll admit that because that's part of their operations and it's a known part of their operations.
Yeah, this is why I was talking about incentives rather than disincentives. I don't think disincentives are bad. So basically, if you get caught, you get punished. And my view, we could even do a bit more. I don't think that there is sufficient punishment for some of the economical crimes that have happened over the last couple of decades. But I think the proactive approach of putting incentives on good behavior would do more good than it does the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely more fun. People like positive reinforcement more so than negative reinforcement. If you punish bad behavior, then people will go to the "but my freedoms" kind of stance. But if you say, hey, if you run your business and it's sustainable, then we'll give you these incentives, that seems like a plus, when really the end result is aiming to be the same thing. You're just framing it in a more positive way.
Yeah. The one thing to the "but my freedoms" argument, I think that is one thing, at least from my point of view, that should have kind of trickled down through this conversation. That I do not believe that the free market is sufficiently capable or willing to regulate itself. So we need some outside forces to do that. And this is where it's nice to have government. So if you want the free market to just regulate itself, it will take a lot of suffering for it to get to a point where we could call it good from our perspective nowadays.
So wait, so you're saying you don't think the free market is an all-knowing entity that's going to solve all our problems?
Yeah. I'm
wow.
sorry.
Damn. I was banking on that one.
Bit of a bummer, I know. All right, that's what I had for this talk. And this kind of last point really, really nicely segues into my own project, which you will find under the Philos-surfing command. So a bunch of you already know, others who are new to this conversation. I'm a filmmaker in Switzerland. I have the unique opportunity to run a cinema while there is rich and powerful people from all over the world coming to town for the World Economic Forum. So this is what you would call the Illuminati global elite, which is a bit of a dubious term and a dubious concept, but that's another topic. But if you would want to address global leadership, you'd come to Davos for this week in the year. And in my opinion, a lot of interesting and quote-unquote good things are happening here during this time. There's a lot of shady business deals happening kind of behind the curtains as well, so it's not all good, also not all bad. I think that's kind of a running theme in these talks. Anyways, I'm able to run the cinema during the time, and I'm able to put on my own project while we have global leadership in town. And what I want to do is to bring voices of common people to this gathering and just have people speak truth to power. And so if you go to the link that Neuro just linked, you can submit your video and I will be playing it in the local cinema. And this year the topic is all about the impact of the pandemic. So I want to gather a lot of different voices from different people all over the globe on how they were impacted by the pandemic, as well as their hopefully positive outlook on what life will be like once we get over this thing, which is bound to happen somewhere in the not all too distant future.
It's gonna finish at around the same time as Brexit is wrapped up.
Damn. Yeah, so
name and country, personal experience. Tell us about the country and how is it affected. Tell us about your thoughts about the national and global response to it, and then your hopes or fears for the world after the pandemic ends. So you get your contact form, and then you put a message and a link to your video. So pretty easy.
Yeah. But I try to really make it as easy as it gets. I think a big hurdle for many people is to be on video, which I understand. I'm hesitant about that too. But for those of you that are camera shy, I would really appreciate to get as many voices as possible, because the more voices I can put on, the better the project gets, and the better result I can show those people that are willing to watch it during the forum.
Sweet.
And I can already say, I don't want to name any names, but there's some fun and interesting Twitch streamer, there's some YouTubers, and there's some really interesting people in general that will have or had a go at making a video for me this year. So I'm really optimistic about the result already, but I'm always happy to have more people contribute and be a part of it. So if you have something to say regarding the pandemic, here's your chance, and I will put it on display for those that probably should see it because they're too busy buying yachts and other stuff.
Sorry, I can't watch this video. I'm reading the yacht catalog right now. Want to shake your fist at the wealthy? Submit a video to the link in the chat with EcceFatum and let them know how you feel about how the pandemic went. It's actually pretty useful because if they live in their bubble of wealthy people all the time and they talk with their inner circle and stuff, they don't really get the best perspective of what's happening on the ground for your average working people. I submitted one of these for last year, I think, or the year before.
2 years ago. Last year, the forum didn't take place due to some virus. I'm not sure what that was all about.
Oh, I remember that one. Hey, nice. We won! Ha! Capital. Excellent work. Well, cool. I will put this in the description of the YouTube video as well. You said you have until the end of the month, right?
Yes, I need to adjust the date on the page. I seemingly have only done it at one of the 2 dates I put in.
Quick question.
For everyone interested, it's the end of the month. You have time until then. And yeah, I hope everyone has a nice holiday season, Christmas, or whatever you're celebrating. And best of luck for the next year.
Thank you. And thank you, EcceFatum, for coming on for another episode of Philos-o-clock with EcceFatum. Good luck with your capitalism and so on. Later, dude.
You.
Nice.